Okay, let's get into this. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we have a really fascinating mission. We are going to analyze the reading list of one of the most consequential world figures of our time, Vladimir Putin.
And this is a really unique lens to look through.
It is. Our whole goal here is to dive into the specific books, the authors, and, well, the philosophies that seem to have fundamentally shaped his thinking.
And the sources we're using, they're drawn from various interviews and public statements over quite a long period.
Right, and they all confirm one thing. Despite a schedule that you can only imagine is crushing, he is a genuinely avid reader. It's reportedly how he finds what he calls active rest.
He apparently reads heavy classics, often right before bed.
Imagine that.
And that detail is actually crucial for you, the listener, to keep in mind here. We're primarily looking at the foundational texts.
This isn't what he picked up at the airport last week.
Exactly. This isn't a list of recent bestsellers. This is the bedrock, the library that seems to have molded his character, informed his view of history, and really provided the ideological scaffolding for his political worldview a long time ago.
So we're basically tracing the intellectual origins of what we see today.
That's the mission.
Okay, so we've organized this deep dive into three major parts. We'll start with the formative classics, the big Russian novels, and the international adventure stories that kind of defined his youth.
And his idea of heroism.
Yes. Then we'll pivot to the really heavy historical and philosophical texts. The ideological blueprints, you could say.
The ones he pulls from in speeches.
Exactly. And finally, we'll look at his personal and sometimes very surprising taste in poetry and his philosophy on the act of reading itself.
So let's start with the giants, the core of Russian literature. This selection isn't just about, cultural appreciation.
No, it's much deeper than that.
It's about appreciating epic scale, moral depth, and that fundamental tension between the individual and the state, the individual and history itself.
I think what's immediately striking is the sheer weight of these choices. I mean, we're talking about books that demand a massive intellectual effort.
Right. And Lev Tolstoy is placed at the absolute peak. Our sources name War and Peace as his favorite book.
Yeah.
He calls it the peak of Russian classics.
So what's the takeaway there? What does loving War and Peace tell you?
Well, it suggests an appreciation for the vast, almost unstoppable forces of history. The idea that even great men, even in Napoleon, are often just agents of a larger historical destiny.
So when a leader elevates a book like that, they're kind of acknowledging, maybe ironically, that their own actions are part of this huge, predetermined sweep of events.
It's a certain kind of fatalism, almost.
That's a sharp point. But, okay, if War and Peace is about destiny, how do we square that with the very active, assertive leadership style he projects?
That's where Dostoevsky comes in.
Okay.
Right alongside Tolstoy, Dostoevsky's work is constantly revisited. We see titles like Brothers Karamazov, Crime and Punishment.
The heavy hitters.
The heaviest. And these aren't about destiny. They are about moral debt, redemption, psychological darkness, and the profound cost of ideological conviction.
So it's an engagement with the burden of choice.
Yes. It suggests a continuous intellectual grappling with the weight of moral choices and the psychological burdens of power. He's not just reading about history, he's reading about the cost to the soul.
And then there's Pushkin, Alexander Pushkin, the foundation of it all.
Integrated into his life almost unconsciously.
We found that one specific, very memorable detail. He was photographed reading Eugene Onegin at the UN General Assembly back in 2018.
And more importantly, he quotes Pushkin from memory.
So this isn't just a prop for a photo op. It's a deep, lifelong internalization of the classical language and the core narrative of Russian culture.
Exactly. So you have this trio. Pushkin provides the linguistic and poetic foundation, Tolstoy gives you the historical scope and fatalism, and Dostoevsky brings the moral complexity.
A complete worldview right there. Okay, so that's the internal, soulful core. Now let's shift to the external world of action and struggle.
The adventure writers.
Yes, the international authors who helped shape his youth. The internal struggle of Dostoevsky sort of finds its external counterpart here, right, in the active struggle.
Indeed. And you see a very strong theme emerge. Admiration for stoicism, for resilience. Ernest Hemingway is highlighted as a key influence on his character.
He specifically praised the brave heroes in books like A Farewell to Arms and The Old Man and the Sea.
And that taste, it aligns perfectly with the public persona he cultivates. Enduring hardship, the solitary struggle, facing overwhelming odds with a kind of silent dignity.
That admiration for struggle, especially against nature, is completely cemented by Jack London.
Oh, absolutely. He devoured books like Call of the Wild and White Fang when he was young.
And those stories are brutal. They're meritocratic. It's all about survival and the law of the wild. It's a pretty powerful metaphor for geopolitics, isn't it?
It is. And then for pure escapism, but one that emphasizes loyalty in a totally consuming narrative, we have Alexander Dumas.
Right. There was that great anecdote.
Yes. One report mentioned he read all volumes of The Three Musketeers as a kid and felt a genuine void when he finished.
A void. That craving for an all-consuming story about absolute loyalty, daring, defined friendships.
Hmm.
That's incredibly telling about what a young person desires.
It really is.
And to round out this adventure set, there's Jules Verne.
Books like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea were cited for developing imagination.
So let's recap this foundation. You've got the depth of the Russian psyche, the stoicism of the West, and then the imaginative scope you'd need for a global perspective.
And now we have to shift gears dramatically.
Okay.
We're moving from fiction that shapes character to the heady, dense nonfiction that provides the ideological and historical justification for state power.
This is where we find the blueprints for his political thought.
Precisely.
And this section is so critical because these texts aren't just casual reading. They're the intellectual tools he seems to use to interpret Russia's destiny. So we have to handle these specific, sometimes niche thinkers very impartially.
Absolutely. The focus here is laser sharp on Russian identity, historical exceptionalism, and a strong state. Let's start with Ivan Ilyin.
Ilyin.
His work, things like Our Tasks, is reportedly central to his thinking. Ilyin promoted a very specific kind of Russian nationalism. It's focused on a spiritually revived state, and he often contrasted Russia's path with Western democracy.
So what's the core idea?
He offers the idea that Russia requires a strong, centralized, autocratic hand to fulfill what he saw as its unique historical role.
Okay, and what about looking at the post-Soviet period? Where does he draw from for that?
Well, that brings us straight to Alexander Solzhenitsyn, specifically his essay, How to Remake Russia.
Right. Solzhenitsyn, after the Soviet collapse, proposed a model for a spiritual and national revival that it leaned on traditional Russian structures, didn't it?
It did, like the Zemstvo local self-governance. But he strongly argued against just copying Western-style democracy. He saw it as fundamentally incompatible with Russia's traditions.
So we have the ideological justification from Ilyin and this post-Soviet vision from Solzhenitsyn. What about the actual scope of history itself? How does he see it moving?
For that, you have to look at Lev Gumilyov, his book Ethnogenesis and the Biosphere of Earth.
That sounds conceptually heavy.
It is. But basically, Gumilyov proposes a cyclical theory of history. It's centered on something he calls passionarity, the idea that ethnic groups rise and fall based on their collective energy or drive.
So when a leader reads Gumilyov, they're looking at history not as random events,
But as large-scale, predictable, energetic cycles. And that might be used to justify assertive actions as a sign that your nation is currently high in passionarity.
that provides a huge deterministic framework. And this framework is then backed up by classic academic historians, right?
Yes, he goes deep into the academics. He cites Vasily Klishevsky's monumental course of Russian history and Dmitry Likachov's reflections on Russia.
And these are not political tracks.
No, not at all. They're dense, foundational historical analyses. It confirms that his historical context is deeply academic. He's looking for continuous historical threads, not just sound bites.
That immersion really explains the language of historical continuity he often uses. But beyond the abstract ideas, he clearly looks for concrete models of leadership. The sources list Peter I, Catherine II, and Pyotr Stolypin.
And you can pretty clearly infer what he takes from each of them.
Right. Peter I is modernization, centralization, aggressive expansion to compete with the West.
Catherine II is expanding the empire, projecting cultural power. They're both models of transformative, centralized, autocratic rule.
But then there's a detail that, for me, tells the most intimate story about the kind of leadership he truly values. It connects those historical models right to his own background.
The special admiration for Yuri Andropov.
The former KGB chief and later general secretary.
Yes, that is incredibly telling. While Peter and Catherine offer these models of imperial scope, Andropov offers a model of pragmatic, disciplined, security-focused power rooted in the intelligence apparatus.
And Andropov was known for enforcing ideological clarity, for suppressing internal dissent.
Exactly. So this admiration, placed right alongside the great emperors, suggests that the security chief model disciplined, effective, internally focused, is arguably the most personally influential type of leadership on his bookshelf.
Wow, that really paints a complete picture of the intellectual framework. Okay, let's pivot to our third and final segment, his personal taste, the philosophical counterweights, and his specific habits.
This is where we find some really interesting nuance and contradiction. For instance, his favorite poet is said to be Omar Khayyam.
Omar Khayyam.
He specifically recommends reading Khayyam's Rubaiyat on bad days and is known to write quotes from it in his notebook. Khayyam offers this profound blend of hedonism and fatalism
An acceptance of life's ephemeral nature.
and the limits of human control.
Wait, that feels completely disconnected from the relentless, world-shaping ambition you'd get from Ilian or Peter I. What does Khayyam offer that the other texts don't?
A counterweight. Khayyam offers an acknowledgement of human limits, of the futility of striving. It's a philosophical balance to the sheer, demanding weight of leadership.
So it's the ability to step back from the historical struggle and recognize the smallness of man.
A private, necessary fatalism, perhaps. Something that allows him to manage the stress of constant assertion.
And maybe the most jarring contrast of all, the inclusion of Antoine de Saint-Exupéry.
The Little Prince.
Our sources confirm The Little Prince is one of his favorites and that he memorized parts of it in childhood.
Exactly. And The Little Prince is a text about simple human truth, the importance of relationships, essential, uncorrupted wisdom.
So it raises a fascinating question. How do you reconcile the pragmatic, zero-sum realpolitik drawn from the security state with the deep humanism and simplicity of a children's classic?
It implies a complex internal landscape, one that values both hard cynicism and fundamental, universal truths.
Let's look at his philosophy on reading and his advice, because that offers direct insight into how he approaches strategy. He shares the children's books he reads to his grandchildren, specifically Samuel Marshak's 12 Months.
Right, noted as their favorite. But the most profound piece of advice we pulled from the sources comes when he recommends Ivan Turgenev's Hunter's Sketches.
What's the advice?
He advises that the process is important, not the result.
The process is important, not the result. That concept is huge. It basically defines the long game of power.
It does.
How does that philosophy of hunting apply to political maneuvers or to reading history?
Well, it dictates patience, method, relentless execution. Instant gratification or short-term results become irrelevant compared to the discipline of the continuous effort.
So this idea is the meta rule for everything else on his shelf.
It could be. From absorbing Tolstoy's scope to executing a long-term historical destiny. Reading, as he describes it, is learning to savor. It's an active, appreciative, methodical experience.
So what does this all mean for us? I mean, we've traveled through the classics of struggle, the historical blueprints, the personal philosophy.
The key takeaway is the synthesis. This reading list isn't random. It's a curated syllabus. It mixes the resilience of Hemingway, the moral gravity of Dostoevsky, the historical justification from Ilian, and the practical, security-minded efficiency of Andropov.
He's constantly seeking validation, wisdom, and strategic templates from the past to apply to the present.
His reading provides the narrative he seems to favor, one of struggle, destiny, and centralized power.
That leaves us with one final provocative thought for you to consider. Given his profound connection to these classical and biographical works, Peter I, Catherine II, and his philosophy that the process is important, not the result, what specific historical period or biography do you think he would choose to read next?
Knowing his reading is guided by these themes of struggle, leadership, and Russian historical identity. What's next on the nightstand?
It definitely gives you a new appreciation for what's happening when he tells the world he's relaxing with the book. Thank you for sharing your sources with us for this deep dive.
Always a pleasure to unpack the library.